Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, February 2nd, 2026. I was walking through the airport this morning, and I swear, the whole conversation around health has just completely shifted.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, it used to be people arguing about, carbs versus fats, or if kale is still a superfood, or if we've all moved on to sea moss or whatever.
Right, the what?
Exactly, the what. But now, it is all about the clock. I mean, I overheard two separate conversations about people's eating windows. One guy was saying he was white-knuckling it until noon.
White-knuckling it. I know that feeling. It really has shifted, hasn't it? We've absolutely moved from the era of what do I eat to the much more stressful era of what am I allowed to eat.
It is. And honestly, it feels a bit like a cult sometimes. You've got the 16.8 people who sort of look down on the 12.12 people.
And then the 1 meal a day people look at everyone else like they're just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. But here's the thing that really gets me. The promises are completely out of control. I saw an influencer just yesterday claiming that if I just stop eating at 6 p.m., my body will enter deep autophagy.
Ah, the magic word, autophagy.
Right. And I'll supposedly live to be 150, and I'll, shred body fat while I'm sitting there watching Netflix.
Which sounds fantastic, doesn't it? I mean, who wouldn't sign up for that?
Of course.
If only biology were that simple. The problem is that the marketing of time-restricted eating, or TRE, is currently running about 10 miles ahead of the actual science.
Right.
And that gap is where people get hurt, or at the very least, where they get really, really frustrated.
So that's our job today. We're going to try and close that gap. We're doing a full audit, a deep dive into time-restricted eating. But we have some ground rules today, right? Because this topic is a minefield of bad data.
It is, specifically a minefield of rodent data.
So many mouse studies.
So many. And I love mice. They're great for basic science, but they're just terrible proxies for human dieters.
Why is that? Why can't we just trust the mouse studies?
Well, a mouse has a metabolic rate about 7 times faster than a human's. It's just burning through energy. So if a mouse fasts for 24 hours, that's the metabolic equivalent of a human not eating for an entire week.
A whole week? Wow. Okay, so it's not even in the same ballpark.
Not at all. So for today, we are tossing out the rodent data. We are looking exclusively at what we're calling the human stack.
The human stack. I like that. What's in it?
We're talking about randomized controlled trials, RCTs, the gold standard. We have over 99 of them in the source pile for today, covering more than 6,500 adults.
Okay, so this is serious data.
The most serious. We're digging into major reviews from the New England Journal of Medicine, from JAMA, and some really specific investigations into early versus late eating windows. We are going to figure out, once and for all, if skipping breakfast is a biohack, or if it's a huge mistake. And we have to talk about the muscle thing, because I was reading the brief on the danger zone section, and I actually got a little nervous. It turns out a lot of us, and I might be including myself here, might be doing this completely wrong.
You mean losing muscle instead of fat?
Yeah.
It's a very, very real trap. It's something we call the skinny fat paradox of fasting.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
Okay, let's start with the absolute basics, because I feel like the terminology is all over the place. I hear intermittent fasting, I hear TRE. Are these just synonyms, or is there a technical difference that I'm missing?
There is a difference, and it's a useful one. Think of intermittent fasting as the big umbrella term. It's the whole category.
Okay.
Under that umbrella, you have all sorts of different strategies. You have things like alternate day fasting, where you eat normally one day and then maybe only 500 calories the next.
Right, I've heard of that. And the 5.2 diet?
Exactly, 5.2 diet.
Right.
Those are really aggressive calorie manipulation strategies. Time-restricted eating, or TRE, is different. It's specifically about the daily clock. So not about weekly calories, but daily timing.
Precisely. You're restricting your food intake to a specific window of time, usually somewhere between 4 to 10 hours every single day.
So the key here is the consistency. It's a daily rhythm, not a weekly shock to the system.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's a rhythm. And the most common version, the one you hear about at the airport, is 16.8.
16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating.
Yep. And usually that looks like skipping breakfast, starting your lunch around 12 p.m., and then finishing your last bite of dinner by 8 p.m.
Which, let's be honest, is popular because it's the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, most people I know aren't that hungry first thing in the morning anyway.
Yeah.
And absolutely nobody wants to skip dinner.
Why not?
Because that's when we socialize. That's family time, it's date night, it's life.
You're exactly right. It fits our social lives, which is a huge factor in adherence. But we also see other protocols. There's 14.10, which is a much more gentle entry point. And then you have the more extreme warrior diet types doing 20.4, a 20-hour fast, and a 4-hour window. But for research purposes and for most people, 16.8 is the gold standard.
Okay, so let's get into the why. Why are millions and millions of people doing this? For most, I have to assume it's weight loss.
Overwhelmingly, yes.
And the story we're all told, the story I see on TikTok,
Yeah.
is that by fasting for 16 hours, we're flipping some kind of magic metabolic switch.
Right.
We deplete our liver glycogen, we start burning fat for fuel, our insulin plummets, and we become this, I don't know, this metabolic furnace.
Yeah.
Is any of that true?
So,
If I eat a burger in an 8-hour window, does my body burn it off differently than if I eat that same exact burger spread over a 14-hour window?
this is probably going to be the first big bubble we have to pop today. And I want to be really careful here because TRE does cause weight loss. It works. But the mechanism isn't what most people think it is. The really rigorous data, and we have to talk about the New England Journal of Medicine study by Liu and colleagues here, it shows us that the magic is not metabolic. It is behavioral.
Behavioral, not metabolic. Okay, break that down for me. What did Liu's team actually do in that study?
It was a brilliant study because it was so strict and so long. They followed participants for a full 12 months.
A whole year. That's rare.
Very. They took two groups of participants with obesity. One group did TRE eating only between 8:00 a.m. and 4:00 p.m. The other group, the control group, ate whenever they wanted across the day.
Oh, okay. Sounds standard so far.
But here's the kicker. They put both groups on a calorie-restricted diet. Women were assigned 1,200, 1,500 calories a day, men 1,500, 1,800. They matched the calories perfectly.
Ah, so they didn't just let the fasting group accidentally eat less. They forced both groups to eat the exact same amount of energy.
Correct. They gave them food journals, they called them, they coached them, they controlled for the calories. And think about it. If the metabolic switch theory were true, if fasting magically burned more fat, calorie for calorie, the TRE group should have lost significantly more weight.
It makes sense. They had the fasting advantage.
But they didn't.
Oh.
Both groups lost about the same amount of weight, roughly 6 to 8 kilograms over the year. There was no statistically significant difference in weight loss, fat mass loss, or waist circumference between the group that fasted and the group that just counted calories.
That is actually kind of depressing. So you're telling me that if I eat 2,500 calories in 4 hours or 2,500 calories spread over 16 hours, my bathroom scale doesn't know the difference?
Strictly speaking, when it comes to weight loss and when calories are perfectly matched,
Yes.
the scale doesn't really care.
So what's the magic then? Why does it work for so many people in the real world outside of the lab?
Because in the real world, outside of a lab, it forces something called unintentional caloric restriction.
Unintentional caloric restriction. That sounds
Yeah.
less exciting than metabolic switch. So it's just a trick to stop me from snacking.
It's a boundary, a very powerful one. Think about your own eating habits. Be honest. When do you eat the junk? When do you grab the ice cream, the chips, the extra glass of wine you probably didn't need?
Okay, it's 9:30 p.m. I'm on the couch. I'm watching a show. The kids are in bed. That's when it happens.
For almost everyone, that's when it happens. Now, what if you have a simple, non-negotiable rule that says the kitchen is closed at 8:03 p.m.?
Then, I don't eat the ice cream.
You just eliminate those calories. You don't have to count them. You don't have to weigh them. You don't have to log them into an app. They just disappear from your day.
Because you run out of time.
You run out of time to eat them.
Yeah.
The data from dozens of trials shows that when people start a TRE protocol, they naturally, spontaneously, drop about 200 to 500 calories from their daily intake.
Without even trying.
Without even trying. So it's not a metabolic furnace. It's a lock on the pantry door.
It's a behavioral guardrail.
A behavioral guardrail. And for many, many people who hate calorie counting, that is a massive win. It's a sustainable way to create a deficit. That's why it works for weight loss.
Okay, I can accept that. It's a tool, not a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
It works because it stops me from being a glutton at midnight. That makes sense.
It does.
But if the weight loss is just about calories, is there any other health benefit to the fasting itself? I mean, are we just torturing ourselves with these windows for no reason other than to trick ourselves into eating less?
No, not at all.
Because the outline here mentions circadian alignment, This sounds like we're finally getting into the actual machinery of the body.
This is where the story completely changes. This is the second act. While weight loss is primarily driven by the calorie deficit, your metabolic health things like where your blood sugar goes, how your insulin works, your blood pressure, that is all heavily, heavily influenced by the clock.
The clock.
Yes. And this brings us to the really critical early versus late TRE debate.
Right. And most of us, myself included, do the late version. Skip breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner. It's easy. But you're saying the science suggests our bodies might actually prefer the opposite.
Our bodies are fundamentally designed to do that. I mean, think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For millions of years, what did we do? We were active during the day when the sun was up.
Hunting, gathering.
Exactly. And we were resting and sleeping at night when it was dark. We didn't have refrigerators. We didn't have 24-hour drive-thrus. We didn't have Uber Eats delivering a burrito at 11 p.m. Our entire biology is hardwired to process energy efficiently when the sun is up.
So you're saying my pancreas, it actually knows what time it is.
It absolutely does. This is so fascinating. Your brain has the master clock, right? The suprachiasmatic nucleus, it responds to light. But your liver, your gut, your muscles, and yes, your pancreas, they all have their own independent molecular clocks.
Peripheral clocks.
Peripheral clocks. And they are all primed and ready for peak efficiency in the morning.
Give me a practical example. Let's say I eat a donut, same donut, 200 calories of glazed sugar. What happens inside my body if I eat it at 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m.?
Great example. At 8 a.m., your insulin sensitivity is at its peak for the day. Your pancreas is awake, it's had its coffee, it's ready to go.
Okay.
It sees that sugar coming, it pumps out a really efficient, appropriate amount of insulin, and your muscles, which are also awake and primed for activity, they suck that sugar up like a sponge to be used for energy. The blood sugar spike is managed quickly and effectively.
And at 8 p.m., same donut.
Very different story. At 8 p.m., your body is preparing for sleep. Your brain is starting to secrete melatonin, the hormone of darkness. And here's where this fascinating biological conflict happens. Melatonin actually binds to receptors on your pancreas and tells it to stop producing so much insulin.
Wait, why would it do that? That seems counterproductive.
It's a protective mechanism. Think about it. If you're sleeping for 8 hours, you aren't eating. If your insulin was high and active all night, it would keep pushing your blood sugar down and down until you went hypoglycemic, which could be very dangerous.
Oh, right. So the body shuts down insulin production at night to keep your blood sugar stable while you fast.
Precisely. It's a safety feature. But what happens if you just ate a massive pizza and that donut at 9 p.m.?
Then you've got a problem.
You have a huge problem. You've got this massive load of glucose and fat hitting your bloodstream, but the melatonin is telling your pancreas to clock out for the night.
So the sugar just hangs around.
It stays in your blood for much, much longer. It causes more inflammation, more oxidative stress. It's far more likely to get shuttled into your liver and stored as fat because your muscles are essentially asleep and not accepting deliveries.
Wow. So eating late is basically forcing your body to do a job that is already clocked out from.
That is the perfect analogy. You are making your pancreas work the night shift and it does a terrible job.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot of sense.
And this is why we have to look at the Sutton study from 2018. This was a landmark trial published in Cell Metabolism.
What did it do?
They took a group of men with prediabetes and put them on a very specific protocol. Early time-restricted eating, or eTRE.
How early are we talking?
Aggressive. They had a 6-hour eating window that started at 8 a.m. and ended at 3:05 p.m.
3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
They finished their last meal for the day by 3 p.m.
Yeah.
That's socially brutal. Who can even do that?
It's incredibly hard. You're not going out for dinner with friends, that's for sure. But they did it for science. And here is the absolute key to this study. They fed these men enough food so they did not lose any weight.
They kept them weight stable.
Exactly. They wanted to isolate the variable. They wanted to see if the timing of the food alone could fix their health without the confounding effect of weight loss.
And what happened?
The results were absolutely stunning. Even without losing a single pound, these men saw their insulin sensitivity improve dramatically. Their beta cell function, how well the pancreas works, got better. Their oxidative stress markers plummeted.
Okay, that was impressive.
But the big one, the one that really made everyone sit up and pay attention, their blood pressure dropped by an average of 11 points systolic.
11 points.
Whew.
just from changing their meal times. That is better than some blood pressure medications.
It is a clinically massive effect. And remember, this wasn't because they got skinnier or ate less. It was purely because they aligned their food intake with their body's natural circadian rhythm. They stopped making their pancreas work the night shift.
That is incredible and also really, really annoying.
Why annoying?
Because it means the most biologically effective way to do this, eating breakfast and the big lunch and then skipping dinner, is the one version that almost nobody wants to do because it ruins your social life.
It is the great paradox of TRE. Biology prefers early TRE. Society and our modern lives, they insist on late TRE.
We have to pick our poison. So, to summarize so far, calories drive the weight loss, but timing drives the deep metabolic health benefits.
That's a great summary.
Okay, let's pivot, because now I want to talk about the dark side. Section 3 in our research stack is labeled the danger zone, and it's all about muscle loss. This is the part that worries me.
And it should. This is the part of the conversation that keeps me up at night when I see people blindly following these trends without any guidance.
The key study here is low et al. It's called the TREAT trial from 2020 in JAMA Internal Medicine. Walk us through this because the stats in the notes are genuinely alarming.
They are. So Lowe and colleagues took a group of healthy adults and put them on a standard 16.8 protocol. The eating window was noon to 8 p.m.
So the typical skip breakfast plan.
The one almost everyone does. But, and this is the critical detail, they weren't given any specific instructions on what to eat. They were told to eat ad libitum.
Which means?
As much as you want. Eat until you're full. No protein targets, no calorie goals, just don't eat before noon or after 8 p.m.
Okay, so that's exactly how 99% of people do this in the real world. I'm fasting, so I can eat whatever I want later.
That's the mindset. And what happened? They lost weight about 1 and 2% of their body weight over 12 weeks, which is pretty typical.
Okay, so it worked.
But when they put them in the DEXA scanners to look at their body composition, to see what that lost weight was actually made of, the results were shocking.
What'd they find?
They found that a deeply concerning amount of the weight they lost was lean mass, muscle. In some of the calculations they ran, it was as high as 65% of the total weight loss.
65%. Hold on, stop. If I lose 10 pounds on that diet, you're telling me that 6.5 pounds of that could be my hard-earned muscle. That's a metabolic disaster.
In that specific study context, yes, it was effectively a muscle-wasting diet. Now, to be fair, that 65% number is on the high end of the estimates, and other studies show closer to a 20–30% lean mass loss, which is more typical for any diet.
But still, the Loma study exposed this massive vulnerability. Why did it happen? Was it just the fasting itself that ate the muscle?
It was a perfect storm of two failures. First, and most importantly, protein intake. When you squeeze all of your eating into an 8-hour window, it is surprisingly hard to physically consume enough protein.
How so?
Well, let's say you're an active person and you need 150 grams of protein a day. That's a lot of chicken and eggs and yogurt to cram into 2 main meals. Most people get full on the more palatable carbs and fats first, and the protein gets left behind.
So they were chronically under-eating protein.
Drastically. They just weren't hitting their targets. And second, there was no resistance training requirement in the study.
Ah, I see. So the body is in a calorie deficit. It doesn't have enough amino acids, the building blocks coming in from food, and the muscles aren't getting a signal that they're needed.
Exactly. Think of your muscle like a house that's constantly under renovation. You need bricks. That's the protein. And you need a foreman on site yelling, "Build, we need this house."
That's the resistance exercise.
And in the Lowe study, there were no bricks and no foremen. So the body, being very smart and efficient, looked at that metabolically expensive muscle tissue and said, you know what, we don't really need this. It burns too much energy just sitting there. Let's tear it down for fuel.
And you end up skinny fat.
That is exactly the trap.
You weigh less on the scale, which you celebrate, but your body fat percentage might actually go up. Your metabolism crashes because you've lost the engine of your body.
That is the paradox, and it's why just skipping breakfast is not a complete strategy. It can backfire badly if you don't do it right. You have to be strategic.
So what's the fix? How do we avoid this trap? The notes mention something called a protein anchor. I love a good buzzword. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means that if you are going to restrict your time, you absolutely cannot restrict your protein. You have to bookend or anchor your eating window with high-quality protein.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It means you need a significant bolus of protein at the very start of your window, your breakfast.
Give me a number and a food.
At least 30 grams. For some people, 40 or 50. That could be a big scoop of whey protein in water or a smoothie, a large container of Greek yogurt, or a decent-sized chicken breast. You need to flood your bloodstream with amino acids immediately to flip the switch from catabolic, breaking down muscle, to anabolic, building it up.
Okay, protein first, and the other anchor.
The other anchor is at the very end of your window. This is what I call the satiety shield for the overnight fast.
Satiety shield, I like that too.
Before you close the kitchen for the night, you need another 30 to 40 grams of protein, preferably something that digests a bit more slowly.
Like what?
Casein protein is the classic example, which is found in cottage cheese, or a piece of steak or some eggs. You want that protein to digest slowly while you sleep, providing a steady trickle of amino acids to your muscles to protect them during the 16-hour fast.
So the takeaway is absolutely no tea and a piece of toast to break your fast.
Yeah.
And no bowl of cereal and a banana for your last meal.
That is the perfect recipe for muscle loss. And of course, you have to lift heavy things. You have to.
The foreman.
You need the foreman. The Morrow study, for instance, showed that when resistance-trained men did a 16.8 protocol, they actually lost fat and kept all their muscle. Why? Because the lifting signal was strong enough to tell the body, hey, this muscle is essential. Keep the muscle, burn the fat instead.
Okay, that is incredibly clear and actionable. Lift weights and sandwich your eating window with big servings of protein.
That's the formula for success.
Let's zoom out a bit to overall cardiometabolic health. We talked about that incredible 11-point blood pressure drop in the early TRE group. But what about the general stats for the more common late TRE? What do we see for cholesterol, triglycerides?
The signal is generally positive, but it's nuanced. For blood pressure, when you look at the meta-analyses that pool all the data together, we see a consistent, statistically significant drop of about 3 to 4 points in systolic pressure.
Okay, so more modest than the eTRE study, but still something.
It's modest for an individual, but it's huge from a public health perspective. A sustained 4 to 6 millimeter of mercury drop in blood pressure can theoretically reduce your risk of cardiovascular mortality by around 10%. It's clinically relevant.
Okay, and where does TRE really shine?
Triglycerides.
That's the fat that's literally in your blood after a meal, right?
Exactly. And high triglycerides are a major independent risk factor for heart disease. TRE consistently smashes triglycerides. The evidence here is rated as high certainty.
Why is it so effective for that?
It's simple, really, because you're fasting for 16 hours every day. Your body has a prolonged period with no new fat coming in. It gives it ample time to clear the fat from your last meal out of the bloodstream and actually burn it for energy.
Makes sense. What about cholesterol, LDL, the bad cholesterol? Does TRE fix that?
That's the mixed bag. It's really inconsistent. Some studies show LDL goes down, others show no change at all. Some even show a slight increase, especially if people are breaking their fast with high saturated fat foods like bacon and butter coffee.
So TRE is not a magic shield against a bad diet.
Absolutely not. You can't outfast a terrible diet. If you cram burgers and fries into your 8-hour window, your LDL will likely stay high or even go up.
It always comes back to food quality, doesn't it? We can never escape it.
We can't. The clock helps, but the ingredients you put on your plate still matter enormously.
Okay, now I have to ask about the mental aspect.
Yeah.
Because the influencers I see online, they don't just talk about weight loss. They claim that fasting gives them euphoric focus. They say they're sharper, smarter, happier. Is that just the placebo effect, or is there any hard data on this?
It's a little bit of both. The data on mental well-being is, let's just call it messy.
Nothing.
Messy.
Okay.
There is no consistent, high-quality evidence that TRE is a cure for clinical depression or anxiety. In fact, in the initial stages, we see the opposite. There's a very real phenomenon in the first 2 to 4 weeks that we call the hangry phase.
Oh, I know the hangry phase well.
Right, irritability, fatigue, a constant nagging obsession with food. You're just staring at the clock waiting for noon to strike. That is very real, and it causes a lot of people to quit.
But what happens if you push through that?
If you adapt, which most people do after about a month, some small trials do report improvements in measures like vigor. People feel lighter, they don't have that classic post-lunch slump.
That food coma feeling?
Exactly. By consolidating your food or even skipping a heavy breakfast or lunch, your catecholamines like adrenaline and noradrenaline stay a bit higher during the day, which can feel like increased focus or energy to some people. But it's not a guaranteed nootropic.
And what about the biggest claim of all? Longevity, living forever, the whole autophagy promise.
I really hate to be the bearer of bad news on this one, but there is zero, and I mean zero, human clinical trial data proving that TRE extends human lifespan.
None at all.
None. Think about it. Humans live for 80, 90 years. We can't do a 50-year randomized controlled trial where we lock one group of people in a 16.8 cage and compare them to another. It's impossible.
So where do all these claims come from?
They all come from lower organisms. They come from mice, fruit flies, and worms.
And again, we are not mice.
We are not mice. If you starve a mouse, it lives longer. It goes into this hibernation-like damage resistance, preservation mode. That's a great survival strategy for a mouse. It's not clear that it works the same way in well-fed humans.
So what can we say about it in humans? Do we see any hints?
We see proxies. We see good things. The Sutton study, for example, showed a reduction in markers of oxidative stress, like 8-isoprostane. That's a good thing. It suggests we might be reducing cellular damage, that we might age better. But it is a massive, massive leap to go from that to saying 16.8 will add 10 years to your life.
So anyone promising that is just guessing.
They are extrapolating way beyond the available human data. So my advice is, do it for the blood pressure benefits. Do it as a tool for weight management. But please, don't do it expecting to become an immortal vampire.
Good advice. Speaking of mortality, we absolutely have to address the elephant in the room. This is the part of our deep dive where we have to play true crime detective.
Ah, yes.
Last year, maybe it was a year before, a headline came out that absolutely terrified my aunt. She called me in a panic. It said that eating in an 8-hour window was linked to a 91% higher risk of dying from heart disease.
I remember it well.
91%. That is a horrifying number. What on earth was that study?
That was the NAS analysis and was a classic textbook example of science by press release. It made global news. It was everywhere.
So what was it?
It was an observational study. The researchers looked at health and diet survey data from over 20,000 American adults. And yes, when they crunched the numbers, the raw data showed that the people who reported eating in an 8-hour window or less were more likely to have died from cardiovascular causes over the follow-up period.
So was the study just wrong? Or is fasting actually deadly?
The study wasn't wrong in its mathematics, but the public interpretation of it was deeply flawed because of a critical concept called reverse causality. We can't just look at the number. We have to ask, who were those people?
Okay, so paint the picture for me. In a giant population survey, like any ATEs, who are the people who are only eating in a tiny 8-hour window?
Well, they're generally not the health-conscious biohackers who are listening to this deep dive. They're often shift workers, truck drivers, people working 2 low-wage jobs who literally only have time for 1 big meal a day.
So people under a lot of stress.
A lot of stress, and crucially, people who are already sick.
What do you mean, sick?
Think about it for a second. When you have a serious chronic illness, cancer, congestive heart failure, severe kidney disease, what happens to your appetite?
It vanishes.
It vanishes, you feel nauseous, you have no energy, you might only be able to stomach 1 small meal a day because you're already very unwell.
Oh. So the short eating window wasn't the cause of them dying. It was a symptom of the fact that they were already dying.
That is exactly what reverse causality means. The illness caused the short eating window, not the other way around. Now, the researchers tried to adjust for this statistically, but it's very, very hard to fully strip out that sick patient effect from observational data.
And there was a big data collection issue too, right?
A huge one. They determined every single person's lifelong eating pattern based on just 2 days of dietary recall surveys.
2 days.
They basically asked people, what did you eat yesterday and the day before? And then assumed that was how that person ate for the last 10 or 20 years.
That's absurd. If you asked me what I ate on Super Bowl Sunday, you would think I lived on nothing but nachos and beer. That's not representative of my whole life.
It's incredibly weak data, and you have to contrast that with the gold standard RCTs we've been talking about, Sutton, Jamshed. In those trials, we took healthy people, we assigned them to do TRE, and we watched their health markers get better.
Their blood pressure went down, their insulin sensitivity improved.
Their heart risk markers went down. So the takeaway is you have to trust the trials where we control the variables, not the messy surveys where we just ask people to remember what they ate. The mechanism from the high-quality trials is positive.
So don't panic.
Do not panic over that headline.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. My aunt will be relieved. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. We've debunked the metabolic switch. We've highlighted the powerful circadian benefits. We've issued a serious warning about the muscle trap. Now let's get practical. Section 7. If someone is listening and they want to try this, or maybe fix their current routine, what is the implementation checklist?
Okay, step 1. And this is the most important one. Do not jump straight from your current habits to a 16.8 window.
Why not?
Because if you're like most people, you're probably eating from, say, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's a 15-hour window. Jumping straight to an 8-hour window is going to make you feel absolutely miserable. You will quit in 3 days, I guarantee it.
So you have to ease into it.
You have to ease into it. Start with 12:21. That's super easy for most people. Finish dinner by 7 p.m., have breakfast at 7 a.m. The only thing you're really doing is cutting out the late night snacking.
And that alone, as we said, fixes probably 50% of the problems.
At least do that for a week. Then what you do is you just push your breakfast back by 30 minutes or an hour every few days.
So you train your hunger hormones.
You're training ghrelin. Ghrelin, the main hunger hormone, is not just a response to an empty stomach. It's a learned rhythm. It spikes at the times you normally eat. If you slowly adjust your schedule, it will learn the new schedule and you won't suffer as much.
That's a great tip. Okay, what about the social friction problem we talked about? Biologically, I should be skipping dinner. Socially, I want to keep my friends and family. Is there a compromise, a sweet spot?
There is. The sweet spot for balancing biology and social reality seems to be a 10 to 12-hour window, something like 10 a.m. to 8 p.m.
10 a.m. to 8 p.m., that's actually very doable.
It's very doable. It allows for a late breakfast or brunch and a perfectly normal dinner time. You get most of the benefits of caloric restriction. You stop the late night eating that messes with your circadian rhythm, but you don't have to be the weirdo at the dinner party just sipping water while everyone else eats.
I like that, the don't be a weirdo protocol.
It's highly effective because it's sustainable.
Okay, what about safety? People often complain about feeling dizzy or getting headaches when they start. What's that about?
Hydration and electrolytes. This is huge and almost always overlooked. When you fast, your insulin levels drop.
Right.
A side effect of lower insulin is that your kidneys excrete more water and, crucially, more sodium. You're flushing it out. That's why you get a headache or feel lightheaded or weak. It's usually just sodium depletion.
So just drink more water.
Water isn't enough. In fact, drinking tons of plain water can make it worse by diluting your electrolytes even more. You need sodium. Salt. A pinch of good quality sea salt in your water during the fasting window or a good electrolyte supplement can fix that headache in 10 minutes. It's a game changer.
And who should absolutely not do this? The contraindications.
Okay, clear lines here. Pregnant or breastfeeding women. You're growing a human. Do not ever restrict your nutrient timing or access. People with a history of eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia. TRE can absolutely trigger obsessive control issues and is not recommended.
That makes sense.
And anyone on specific diabetes medications, particularly insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at a very high risk of a hypoglycemic crash if you skip a meal without adjusting your dose. You absolutely must talk to your doctor first.
Okay, final point. Diet quality. Does TRE give you a license to eat junk?
It's the opposite. Because you're eating less food overall, the quality of that food becomes even more important. Micronutrient deficiencies, calcium, magnesium, B vitamins, can become a real issue because you just have fewer opportunities to get them in. Every bite in your window needs to be nutrient dense.
Okay, final thoughts. We have unpacked the entire human stack. What is the one single thing you want people to take away from this deep dive today?
I want people to stop looking for magic and start looking at biology. TRE is a tool. It works for weight management primarily because it helps you eat less without counting. It works for your metabolic health primarily if you align it with the sun and eat earlier.
Right.
But it is not a passive activity. You cannot just not eat and expect to look and feel like an athlete. You have to be an active participant. You have to anchor it with protein, and you have to earn it with movement.
That is the sticky note for the fridge. Anchor with protein, earn with movement.
That's it. If you remember nothing else, remember that.
You know, it's funny. We spend so much energy, so much anxiety, obsessing over the what. Is it keto? Is it vegan? Is it carnivore? We count the grams, we scan the barcodes, we argue online. But we completely ignore the when.
It's the missing variable in the health equation for so many of us.
Right. It really makes you think. If every single cell in our body has its own little wristwatch, if our liver and our pancreas and our muscles are all keeping time, maybe the most natural diet isn't about specific ingredients at all. Maybe it's just about learning to synchronize our forks with the sun.
That is a beautiful way to put it. Synchronize your fork with the sun.
I am going to go have a protein shake. It is almost the end of my socially acceptable 10-hour window. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Stay healthy.